So how do you kill cravings then, if they are ingrained habits that are incredibly hard to beat? I'm excited about this because we're going to be looking at this through the lens of one of my all-time favorite Disney heroines, Mulan. I ate so many more cookies than I was intending to yesterday. You might have been absolutely fine until you looked in the fridge and saw that cake. You didn't realize you were cakeless. I hate all this stuff where it's like, just drink water. I don't want water. Pleasure? Yes! Hello and welcome to the channel. My name is Chelsea, and if you are trying to lose weight on a plant-based diet or really any diet, then this is the channel for you. So this video we're going to talk about how to kill your cravings, and I'm excited about this because we're going to be looking at this through the lens of one of my all-time favorite Disney heroines, Mulan. So if you're trying to lose weight and your cravings keep getting in the way, plus you're a Disney fan, keep watching. So first of all, what the heck is a craving? A craving is just part of how your brain forms habits to make it easier for you to get closer to pleasure, yes, and further away from pain. And we think of habits as things like brushing your teeth or going to the gym or putting on your putting on your seatbelt as you get into the car. But really a habit is just anything that you now do on autopilot because you've had a certain situation and then you do a certain action. So a habit has four parts to it. They are a cue, a craving, a response, and a reward. So this sequence of four events, cue, craving, response, reward, is how your brain forms any habit. So a craving is just part of that sequence. Here's an example of what that could look like. You're looking in the fridge because you're hungry and you want something to eat. As you're looking in there, you see that there's some leftover birthday cake. As soon as you see that being the cue, you start getting a craving for that cake and you want to eat it. Now you have some kind of response. The response is that you actually do eat the cake, and then the reward satisfies that craving because the taste of the cake is great and you get a dopamine hit. So over time, your brain has put together the sequence of events where when you look at cake, you know that by satisfying that craving, you would get a dopamine hit. So that's the craving that gets formed. When you were 3 years old, or, I mean, realistically, we probably all wanted cake when we were 3, but at some point you didn't have that response because you hadn't formed that association yet. So this is how your brain creates habits, and they serve two functions. The first one being is that you learn something from that experience. You learn that when you see cake and then when you eat cake, you get a good feeling. The second one is that you feel satisfied, because really when you think about a cue, all a cue is at the start of that habit sequence is that you start to realize that your current state, where you're currently at, is no longer acceptable to you. You might have been absolutely fine until you looked in the fridge and saw that cake. You didn't realize you were cakeless until you actually had that cue. So anytime we get a craving, it's because of a cue that has happened, and then the reward is to actually satisfy that craving. And this is why cravings are so hard to beat, because over time our brains have had thousands of different instances where we've confirmed that when we have that craving, then we can satisfy it with that particular food. And if you want to hear more about this cue, craving, response, reward cycle and how that relates to habits, then check out this other video that I did about cravings as well. So while it is hard to beat cravings because you're never going to remove every single cue and you're always going to get some kind of craving at some point, there are ways to break these habits, and that's what we're going to get into now. So how do you kill cravings then, if they are ingrained habits that are incredibly hard to beat? I want you to think about this in the same way that you think about the struggle and the journey that Mulan goes through in that movie. And if you are a Mulan fan, please put in the comments because I freaking love this movie. So in the Disney movie of Mulan, she starts out where she's preparing for battle. She goes because she wants to preserve the honor of her family and her dad can't fight and it's really sad, and she meets Mushu and she's got that little cricket thing for luck. And there's all this period where she's trying to become good at fighting and training, and she's spilling water buckets, she can't get up the big pole, and she's really struggling. So I call this stage training for battle. And when it comes to beating your cravings, this is the kind of period where you're doing everything that you can to prepare for when you actually do get that craving. It's where you put in the work before those cravings start so that you can be more equipped to actually handle them in the moment. Some of those things are psychological and some of them are physiological. And the first one is actually setting up your environment for success. And what this basically means is that you remove or minimize as many of those cues, you can also think of them as triggers, as possible. Because if you think about that habit sequence, if you can remove a cue and you don't actually get that cue, then you're not going to get the craving, because a craving is always a response of some kind of cue. And this is why environment is so incredibly important when it comes to habit change. James Clear in his book Atomic Habits says that environment is the hidden hand that shapes human behavior, and it could not be more true when it comes to beating your cravings. Get out of your house the things that are those big triggers for you. If you can't get them out of your house, put them up high. I keep my chocolates, my chips, anything that I don't want to be getting a cue to eat when I open the fridge, up high in the top shelf of my cupboard, in a bag or in a container that I can't see when I look up there. Another way to mentally prep for when you get those cravings is to understand that cravings aren't specific to a specific type of food. A craving is just a desire to alleviate your current state. So even though it feels like it could only be satisfied by that super specific burger at that super specific burger joint down the road, it doesn't necessarily make that true. It doesn't make that true. All you need to do to satisfy a craving when that moment comes is to have something that puts you at an equilibrium again, so that you're no longer craving anything. And when you understand this, you realize that even though you might have a craving for that burger, you actually could satisfy that with a big bowl of rice and veggies, or some banana and ice cream, or any number of other things. Just hit my hand. The third mental prep that you can make is to choose and own your struggles. And I love this book, The Subtle Art of Not Giving a by Mark Manson, and he talks about the fact that our results, or the results that we get, are much more about the struggles that we choose to own than the things that we say we want. Everyone wants to have a great physique and look like an amazing Instagram model, but not many people actually want to choose the pain of going to the gym every day, of really watching what they eat, and all of those things that come with achieving that result. We get in love with the idea of reaching the summit, but we don't actually appreciate or want to do the climb it takes to get there. And I 100% believe that there are ways to make cravings easier and to minimize the effects of them. But at some point, you have to actually own the struggle that this is going to be hard. Beating cravings is going to be a process of changing lifelong habits. There's a struggle there. So when you make the decision, I'm going to own that because I want that result at the end. I'm going to choose that struggle of denying myself or doing something different or setting up my environment differently, then you're much more equipped to actually get that result that you want. Something I've been saying to myself recently since reading this, when I'm really having strong cravings and I just want to go out and completely let loose, is I just say to myself, I choose to own this struggle of feeling this craving, of feeling this state of deprivation or just not really being comfortable right now. I choose to own that because I want that struggle rather than the struggle of giving into that and then my progress going down the drain or not reaching the result that I want. I wanted to read you this little quote from the book because I think it's really good. He says, I wanted the reward and not the struggle. I wanted the result and not the process. I was in love with not the fight but only the victory. And life doesn't work that way. Who you are is defined by what you're willing to struggle for. Boom. And I think Mulan does this pretty well as well. She's not just looking for the glory. In fact, she's not worried about glory or even bringing honor to her family at all. She's there because she appreciates the struggle and it's worth it for her to be there because she gets to save her family. So as I was researching this video and looking around about what other people were saying, I saw a lot of advice about in those moments of having cravings, visualizing who you want to be in the future, and that's going to help you to stay on track because you think, well, in 6 months' time it's going to pay off. I actually completely disagree, and what we know from psychological sciences is that something that is very far in the future, even a week from now, can feel too disconnected from the day-to-day to actually be meaningful in how we act. So rather than trying to visualize a really far off result in the future, connect your short-term goals and your short-term actions to long-term results. set short-term habit goals for yourselves and action goals that strengthen those things on a daily basis. For example, having a habit tracker that you get to tick off or put a little smiley face every day that you have a day without binging or a day without giving in to your cravings. This makes it more satisfying on a daily basis to actually stay on track, and it means that you're making it more unsatisfying to actually give in to those cravings, because you know you won't be able to keep your streak up or put that little smiley face or whatever it is. This is a really key part of habit change, of making your good actions more satisfying and the habits that you're trying to break less satisfying. It's really effective. So something like this can be a really good thing to set up before those cravings come, so that when you are in the moment, you are better equipped to deal with them. So the second phase in the Mulan story is that she's actually there to fight the first battle. She's in the heat of the moment. The Huns are coming over the hill. There's snow on the ground, and you see that real evil guy, and he's like got the red eyes, and there's a hawk, and it's so dramatic. And then all the training comes into play, and she's able to actually fight the battle. It's the same kind of thing with your cravings. So here are 4 things that you can do when you actually get that craving that are gonna make it easier to actually come out the other end not giving into it. The first one, which I believe is the most important, is to quickly get full in that instance that you've got a strong craving. And I don't want you to overanalyze here whether that's because of hunger or because you are dehydrated. I hate all this stuff where it's like, just drink water. It's frustrating because I don't want water when I want to go and get a pizza, all right? But remember how I talked about how cravings are not specific to a specific type of food? They're just wanting to alleviate that feeling that you've got something lacking in your current state. So if you go and you eat whole, filling foods that have a high satiety index, then you're going to be able to feel full and satisfied, and that craving is either going to go or it will be greatly diminished. So different foods have different satiety indexes, and this basically just means how satisfying they are. So things like potatoes have the highest satiety index of all food. If you were to go and eat 5 potatoes when you had a strong craving, it would be very unlikely that you would want to eat anything after that. Actually, a guy called Andrew Taylor, who is known as SpudFit, did an entire year eating only potatoes. I had the pleasure of interviewing him on my podcast, and one of the things that stood out to me was that he told me he never said to himself, you can't eat that McDonald's, or you can't have a glass of wine or a beer. He just told himself, I'm going to eat this big container of potatoes before I go and get that Big Mac. Turns out it worked every single time, because once he'd actually eaten those potatoes first, he never felt like going and eating those foods that he didn't want to. And maybe you're thinking as you're listening, well, my cravings aren't because of hunger. They're purely psychological. They're purely the trauma of my childhood. The thing is that the psychological and the physical are so closely linked that you can't just say that it's one or the other. If you satisfy that hunger, and if you get full, the opposite of hungry, then you are going to find your cravings massively go down. So please just give it a go. In the heat of the moment, another thing that is really effective is delayed gratification. If you can put off satisfying that craving with 10 minutes, even just 10 minutes, you are much less likely to actually go and satisfy it with that particular food that you're trying to avoid or trying to minimize at all. What you're really trying to do here is to rewire this habit pathway in your brain, so that when you get that craving, that you're not automatically just like a robot going through those sequences where you have the same response and the same reward every time. You want to change it so that even though the craving might exist, you start to choose a different response. And this is where delayed gratification is just a way to break up that sequence and start your brain to actually form new pathways and new ways of doing things that you have basically been on autopilot with up until now. I used to have this idea that if I repressed cravings or repressed emotions, that they would come back even stronger. And I think in some ways they did, because I just thought that they would. placebo effect, bias confirmation, here you go. But when I went and had counseling for the first time for the anger issues that I had like many years ago, what I learned in that session was that my anger issues were something that I'd almost trained myself or gotten to the point where when a small amount of stress occurred, I would like blow up in that instance. What my counselor taught me was if I could even count to 10, if I could go into another room, if I could delay that for some length of time, that strong urge would go or it would dissipate and I would be able to choose a different response. This was so incredibly freeing because it made me realize that I could actually change my default behaviors, and I can 100% say now, years later, that I would not consider myself an angry person anymore. You are very capable of changing and rewiring your brain, but it requires that you change that habit sequence. In that moment when you're feeling like nothing will be right with the world unless you go and have a beer and your cravings are so strong and they feel like someone is like literally like knocking on your head trying to control you from inside, another thing you can do is use the next best framework. And this is where you decide, instead of giving into whatever craving it is that you want, you choose a slightly better response to that. You don't go all in or all out all the time, and instead make a better decision than what you normally would. And if you do this over time and you give yourself the grace to look at how you can improve your cravings or your response to them rather than getting it perfect right off the bat, then over time you're going to build trust in yourself about what your response can be. You're not going to be feeling like you're a robot on autopilot, and you're going to be able to choose better and better and better options. It's this upward spiral. I'm super passionate about progress and not trying to be perfect, because perfection really does tend to backfire on us. And if you want to know more about this topic, which really is life-changing, then check out some of the podcasts that I've linked below. I think they're really going to help you. Something kind of funny about Mulan's first battle that she fights is that even though she has all that training, even though she's gone through so much to get to that point, that the battle is actually a bit of a failure. She's wounded and her secret gets discovered. She basically gets kicked out of the army and is disgraced and alone. And I want you to understand that this is a part of the process of beating your cravings. You're not going to go into this and fight one battle and then emerge victorious for the rest of your life. You want to look at fighting and winning the war rather than thinking that you're going to win every single battle. Because what happens in that story is that she picks herself back up again, she uses what she's learned in the past, and then she goes and actually wins the war, brings honor to her family, saves everyone, and then goes home and gets the guy. All of that good stuff. But she didn't let the defeat of that one battle crush her and be the end of her story. No one has perfect eating. I ate so many more cookies than I was intending to yesterday because my mum came and baked Christmas cookies with my kids. This is a process of trying, learning, failing, getting back up again. It is not perfect. It is messy. Don't expect to get this all right. Expect that it is going to be a process. Instead of feeling demoralized when you give in to cravings and seeing that as a reflection that you yourself are a failure, use that as an experience that you can learn from. What are you going to do differently in the next situation, in the next battle? I'm so passionate about this because I think that we've gotten habit change and behavioral change all wrong when it comes to diet, and we think that we can get it right because we do something for 30 days or we follow a challenge for a week or we read a book. It does not work like that. Habits are hard to change and they take a long time to form. So be okay with this process of learning and failing. And I just did a podcast all about how to 10 times your results from actually learning from failure. So I really recommend go and give that a listen, and I think it's probably going to change some perspectives that you have if you do struggle with feeling like a total worthless failure whenever you make a mistake or say that you're going to do something and then do the complete opposite. It's in the description. So to recap this video, when it comes to cravings, cravings are just a normal part in a 4-step sequence that our brains use to form habits. a cue or a trigger, a craving is formed, we have some kind of response, and then we have some kind of reward that is associated with that. That's how we form habits, and that's where cravings fit into it. So when it comes to beating your habits, be like Mulan, prepare for the battle, do the training, fight the battle, probably come out a little bit worse for wear, but then keep fighting and eventually win the war. Alright, that's the end of the video. If you liked it and you got something out of it, then please consider subscribing. I would love to hear in the comments, what are you going to do from watching this video to better prep for the battle, fight the battle, and then get back up again when you inevitably fail? Let me know, I want to hear, and I will see you again next week for another video. Bye! If you're still here, then this is for you. I procrastinated this video for an entire week because I didn't want to fail. I didn't want to get it wrong, and I was intimidated by the fact that I felt ill-equipped to do it. Now that I've done it, I feel so flippin' ecstatic, and you just gotta give things a go. Starting is really half of the battle. So go out there, give it a go, be okay with failure, and you're gonna crush it. This really is goodbye. Bye.